Welcome to the Father Figure Formula. Create moments that matter.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Father Figure Formula Fireside Chat. And today we have a very special guest in a dad's all in. And I mean, when dad's all in, Mr. Kyle Hill is a dad who is all in. So, Kyle, I really appreciate you and your time today. Please take maybe a minute or two to introduce yourself, as I know you can.
Thanks, Lance. Thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate the work that you're doing, trying to help dads be better. So I guess I'll start with, there's my wife and I have been through a long journey um, with our kids, and myself professionally has been a long journey. So it's kind of hard to like pin it down. I guess I'll say is that an odd statement that my kids are my heroes, which is odd to say, but is legitimately true because of the incredible challenges that they have faced through the years, medically, neurodivergently, socially, emotionally, mental health, like all these different challenges that my kids have faced. And I'm not saying it hasn't been without bumps in the road. It is a constant bumpy road. But as adults, sometimes you hear adults complain about minimal things on the grand scope of things. And I think to myself, my kids are dealing with things that are far more significant than certain adults, and they complain a whole lot less. So because of that, we just very my wife and I are very appreciative of the fact that despite the challenges we faced, our kids have been pretty good at trying to persevere through it because it's not been easy. And we'll dive into more about certain things. But me personally, I thought being a dad was going to be maybe a little easier than for most, just because of my background working with kids. So I'm a longtime educator, 20 years working at the elementary school level, elementary general education classes, and also working with kids with special needs. So I have pretty extensive background working with kids with academic needs, behavioral challenges, social emotional challenges, but I still wasn't prepped for what I was going to experience as a father. As odd as that sounds, and I also did a lot of work even with teenagers. I coached soccer at the high school level for boys and girls for a long time, and just had a lot of experience working with youth. But still, found when our kids hit some snags, it was far more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Currently, so I actually have done a variety of roles at the district level. I went on to be in charge of interventions for one of the largest districts in the state, and currently actually a professor where I work with soon to be teachers and educators, which is pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing gig. I have two main passions in life, and it's pretty simple. And I try to keep a pretty simple life in general. So obviously, number one is my family, but number two is helping kids. And so I do that now by helping those who support kids, and hopefully it filters out to the kids I'm working with.
Amazing work. And I know, like, anytime I talk to people who are in education in some shape or form, and then they relate it back to their own family and situation, it's always a similar conversation, all right? Around like, I wasn't prepared, or I mean, my daughter was born at 26 weeks as a micro preemie, 1.78 pounds, and then my son was late and was still in the NICU. So I think like you build yourself up, you educate yourself. There's no handbook, obviously, but you set yourself up for a certain direction, and then life takes you in a completely different direction, as I'm sure you're aware. So what's
It's
part of
crazy how that works,
yeah.
right?
Oh, 100%, 100%. Not what you expect, but I guess how we handle it, right? And that's kind of why we're here.
Right.
So let's kind of get into some questions here. Let's dig in right away here. So like what's part of your fatherhood story that you usually maybe skip because it potentially doesn't look good on the forefront of what you do as a profession?
That's an interesting question. I kind of alluded to it a little bit. Uh, I'll be honest with you. I'm a pretty open person. Like I'm not hiding from a lot. I just pretty secure, and I'll just share whatever I can in hopes that it helps people. But I will tell you, like my specialty area as an educator and somebody who worked with youth for a long time was connecting with kids. And I think I took for granted that it was going to be super easy to just connect with my own kids. And it essentially has always been. However, as your kids get older, you find there's up, there's hills and valleys, and you go through these periods where you feel like I'm not connecting as well with my kid for whatever reason. Fortunately for my wife and I, we've found that like during a month here or a month there that maybe my connection with my daughter, for example, one of my daughters, for example, might not be as strong. They seem to gravitate towards her. Sometimes they kind of go back and forth, as weird as that sounds, right? So I would say that that's probably been one of the biggest surprises. I wouldn't say I shy away from it, but it's knowing that my ability to connect with kids has always been a strength. It's been something that was surprising, and something that was it's kind of have a little bit hard to deal with sometimes, especially now we have twin girls. We're 13, and which is amazing, but also comes with challenges. Hormones do interesting things to kids, males and females. So, there's challenges that come with that. But I say that because, we'll kind of go through these periods where maybe I'm not as connected to my one daughter as opposed to the other. It swings back around. It eventually gets back to where it needs to be. But that would probably be the one area I would say the most is surprising, I guess. And I wouldn't say that I didn't think I was going to struggle in that area as much as maybe I have or over the past few years at least.
Yeah, and I know like there's certain maybe lies we kind of tell ourselves, like, oh, everything is gonna be okay, when you kind of feel like it's not gonna be okay. So was there maybe like a
Yeah.
lie that you told yourself early on as a dad that maybe made anything worse?
Oh goodness, that's a good question. Uh, I would say I probably would something to do with confidence.
Hmm.
Again, I was good, always been good at connecting with kids, but I've always been good at like building confidence in kids who maybe didn't have much. It's kind of been my wheelhouse, specialty area, working with kids with needs. And so I kind of told myself this is going to be easy, building confidence in my own kids. That has not been the case. That has not been the case at all. And what you find is it to be honest with you, across the board, so many kids are struggling in this area. And when I say so many kids, I'm talking about 5 and 6 year olds on up to your teenage years, and even into adulthood. And so I had told myself, maybe not necessarily a lie, but I was convinced like I'm gonna end up with the most confident kids in the world because that's one of my unique traits that I have that I bring in like a strength. And it just as easy as hasn't been as easy as I thought. And like so many things that we know about kids, it's developmental and it takes time. And confidence is such a weird thing because you've got maybe zero confidence in one area and you may have a lot of confidence in another area.
Yeah.
So I guess that would probably be the one area I would say that the most that is I thought they would be ultra confident and they haven't been. And so I've really had my wife and I have had to work on that with them.
I actually have this little, and I know I've talked with other dads who potentially have like little mantras for their family or their kids on a regular basis, like, I'm handsome or I'm beautiful, I'm smart, I'm important. Like, and I really use that as potentially like a lever when I see them struggling in that area. So is there potentially a lever that you use, a tool in your toolbox that you potentially use to kind of bring up some confidence in kids?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not really like a special recipe for everybody. It's more like it dependent on the individual kid. A lot of what I always talk about is, breaking the mindset of, you know, a one size fits all for every person, because that's not really how it works. But I'll tell you, when it comes to confidence building, you can't praise your kids enough. You can't
Mm.
give them enough high fives and fist bumps. You can't give them enough encouragement and let them know that you see the things that they do well. And this, I say the same things to educators when I talk to educators. Like you can't pump them up enough. And there's this philosophy that, and dads struggle with this a lot. Like I see something that needs to be improved on, I'm going to tell them about it. I'm going to keep telling them about it until it gets better. However, if you do that, you're cutting away at their confidence. So it's not necessarily like a balance. It is literally like more praise, the better it's going to be. understand you're going to whittle in some things of, hey, we need to work on this. But I would say the what you can do to encourage them, and then also offer up things that you don't do well, right? Because we've all got them, and be honest with them, be vulnerable with your kids, and say, hey, here's some stuff that I know I'm not great at. And as a person with ADHD, there are a variety of challenges I've always traditionally faced. Like maybe I leave my keys in weird spots, right? I've always had to work on like organizational skills because I've always earlier in young adulthood, and I would really struggle with like organizing my life, and it's something I've always had to work. So sharing those things with your kids is pretty powerful, and letting them know that you can build confidence in those areas if you just keep working on it and get a little bit more success.
I completely align with that. And I put out a post somewhat recently, and there was obviously one of those haters in the comments section who said, "You are raising snowflakes."
Uh,
And I don't necessarily need to say what I said because it was obviously leading with empathy is a big part of what I try to do here. So, what would you say to a comment like that?
uh, yeah. So there is. I'm glad you shared this, by the way, because that is a very masculine approach. It's very common, right? Like you're not raising kids to be tough enough. And on some extent it can be true, but like I said, I'm not a big believer in absolutes. Like it's like all or nothing. Like you give kids nothing but praise, or you don't give kids any praise and you just ask them to be tougher. Well, actually the answer is towards the middle. You want kids to know they need to work on things, but you need to be pumping them up and building them up. And so just having them get quote unquote tougher is not a recipe for success. Now, I will tell you this because everybody's in like their own unique individual. You're going to have some kids who are you can be firm with and maybe push them harder and they respond favorably to. I'll be honest, some of those kids might go on to be in the military. Maybe they go into law enforcement because they take directives really well. But that is a minute number of kids. That is not the majority. The majority need you to flush them with supportive ideas to build them up, especially in during their young years into adolescence, and over time you hope their confidence builds enough that they're able to tackle certain things. But getting kids to develop over time isn't as easy as just to say, hey, we need to be harder on you, we need to treat you like a drill sergeant. And actually what ends up happening for the majority of kids with that kind of aspect is that you create more trauma than you do good, in that you might not know it, but the amount of stress that you create in a situation like that is not good for the brain development. And when you create stress, you create a lot of things that happen internally for kids that you might not ever know. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. So currently teaching, working with soon to be teachers, essentially I'm working with a lot of 18, 19, 20-year old. And I shared something with my class. It had something to do with like overcoming challenges. And I had a student share with me that she said, something you said today really resonated with me because it was kind of like this conversation we're having. She said, my dad kept telling me that wasn't to get over it, get over the problems, and just keep grinding and toughen up.
Hmm.
And she said, over time, I kind of grew to resent my dad because he wasn't even stopping to listen to me. And I think that's common. That's like a common example as fathers. We have this like piece in us that you want to be harder. You want to push your kids. And that comes from a good place, I guess. But, as far as like being supportive, that doesn't necessarily mean you're churning out snowflakes, as you say, right?
Yeah, and I think it's instances of like, pressure that really are how you're kind of dealing with some of those external pressures and such. So let's maybe talk about that for a second. So when the pressure potentially hits you, what do you kind of become? Do you become like the fixer, I assume? Some people become the fighter, or some people in this case are the other alternative to what we just talked about is maybe like ghosting, like they pull back
Yeah,
completely.
that's a good question too, Lance, because we aren't always at our best as dads. Like that's just, Give yourself plenty of grace because
We're human
we try.
beings.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's exactly right. And so because of that, yeah, I've done all those things, and depending on whatever moment. More than not, I'm a fixer, uh, which I have to remind myself a lot, especially being a dad I have an older son, but I have two girls, and I can't always fix some of the problems. And this is what my wife and I have grown to realize because all three of our kids have unique challenges. We can't necessarily fix the problem. We
Mhm.
have to work to support them through it. But I am very much like a fixer. I like to try to see, like, here's an issue. Let's see if we can find a way to solve it. But I will say, there have been plenty of times because of some of the challenges that our kids face. Like, you feel like I want to just back away. Like that is definitely a portion in my brain that's talking to me like, I don't know how to fix this. I need to just step away. And as a father, you got to fight that urge. And it's hard because you can't leave your kids on an island to fend for themselves and try to deal with these struggles together, no matter what struggle it is. And when I say struggle, I often tell people, like, listen, the majority of kids nowadays have challenges. Some people will push back on things that you might share. Some people will push back on that when I say that. And I said, really, I don't think that's groundbreaking. You think, talk about kids with disabilities in various forms, kids with medical needs, kids who are working through anxiety, kids with depression, and then we just go into like kids who are trying to work on confidence and self-esteem, all these different areas. That is the majority of kids. That's not the minority. If you've got a kid that's not struggling in one of those areas, count yourself very lucky
Yeah.
because that's the outliers anymore. And so I say that because as a dad, I know I've grown to realize I can't fix everything, but I'm still very much when pressure's on, I want to fix it because I want to find solutions for my kids. But like so many things in life, you can't always fix things, super quick. You kind of have to be patient and work through it.
Have you ever had a time where, you're basically saying, I'm doing this maybe for my family, but it hasn't necessarily helped your family in that manner?
It's a good question, and I'll be honest with you, I don't think I have, and that sounds odd, but because I think probably the majority of people have. But my outlook on it, that being a dad is far different because I work with so many kids who haven't had um, I don't present parents, right? In many cases, fathers, or maybe didn't have a father in their life at all. From the jump, having the privilege of being a dad, I had a different perspective. I wanted to be all in from day one. But I will say what I actually see in a lot of fathers is that they find unique ways to do things that pull them away from maybe their real responsibilities and find interesting ways to rationalize it. One example, like as a dad, you want to take care of yourself physically so you can be for obviously your own physical health. You want to be in the best mental condition possible so you can support your kids. But, I know far too many dads who spend far too many hours in the gym and they say, like, I'm doing it for my kids. Okay. My comment would be like an hour in the gym is great. Keep yourself healthy. But do you really need to look like Hulk Hogan or some massive monster to be a good dad? No. No, actually, I will push back on that and say the better dad is the one who keeps himself healthy, but spends that extra time with their family. And so, what your question is a good one because I think a lot of dads face that.
Yeah, and I mean, something that's really helped me over time, and I actually think probably my wife helped really realize the importance of boundaries, right? So,
Mm.
what's maybe a boundary that you set for yourself in your personal kind of work-life balance that really kind of save your home from becoming potentially like an intervention unit or some sort of crisis unit, right?
Yeah. So this is a hard one for me because I am not traditionally a person who likes to say no to anybody.
Hmm.
My previous, and as I said, in that right now, I'm a professor, but my previous job, I worked district wide, so I serviced a ton of different schools, and my job was to really be on call for everybody to help out and put out fires and basically help staff so they could support kids with
Mm.
whatever needs that they needed to work through. And I had a hard time saying no. And because of that, my role started off, as a twig, and then by over the course of years grew into like I'm a full tree. And I started to realize because my wife kept chirping at me, like you don't set some kind of boundaries, they're going to keep pushing. And then it bleeds into your family life.
Yeah.
Like, and that then you end up with zero balance in your life. You find that your work life pulls you away from the most important job you have as being a dad. And so I say this as somebody who has always struggled with this. I have learned that there are times when either have to say, no, I'm not going to be able to do that, or maybe it's, I do want to help you, but it's going to have to be, you have to give me some time to fit this in. Maybe it's fitted into my schedule or whatever. And so I say that now, though, as somebody who has the luxury of being able to do that, because there are plenty of fathers out there who, your work is your work and you don't get to call to any shots. And, you know, you losing your job is just could make your whole family crumble. So that in itself is, I say, do what you can to set those boundaries so you can be there, be present for your family, but also remember, give yourself grace. If you gotta do your job, you gotta do your job. And what means the most really is that when you do have time for your family, that you maximize it, you take advantage of it.
Hmm. Yeah, we kind of had this like I wouldn't like a rule, but it's something we've instilled probably over the last year and a bit that's actually been quite helpful. It's just kind of like responsibilities first so we can do our activities, right? And that kind of
Yeah,
goes for everybody, right? We need to focus on like make sure you're have your clothes on right before you start doing something else. For me, is making sure I do my responsibilities so we can really enjoy that time. Now, you kind of let's transition to that word presence, right? Because I think that's a super important one. Like a lot of people say that kind of cliche statement, like the hardest thing is showing up, right? But I mean, when we're talking about like real presence, like being there for your kids, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, all the above, right? What's like the smallest kind of present dad move that you can suggest that has the biggest impact?
yeah. So this is super small, but it's actually pretty meaningful. It's maximizing the time you have, and I'll give you the best example I can think of: car time, right? What you realize is when your kids start to get a little bit older, you start flying them around all these activities, which is great because you want your kids to be active. But you also start to realize your time with them is less. There's a different being a father is different when your kids are 5 versus when they're 12. And they start to get to the point, and this is healthy human development, they start to get to the point where they start to pull away from you a little bit and gather some independence. And all of a sudden you start like their friends start to mean even a little bit more, right? And that's a tough transition for a lot of fathers.
Mhm.
Uh, what I have found is because we're shuttling our kids around all these different things, those little moments in the car, that's our time together. And it doesn't always mean like we're like diving into like tell me your deepest feelings about things. Sometimes that's our time to laugh, that just turn on some music. Sometimes, to talk about whatever, but open to whatever it could be, right? And so that is, as I say, maximize the time you've got available. And sometimes it's just my 10-minute ride from here to taking my kid to karate, or shuttling my kid to soccer practice. Those little moments can mean a lot. And it might not seem a lot in like big significance within a 10-minute stretch, but you start putting those together over time. And that's pretty powerful time that you spend with your kid.
Agreed. Yeah. No, I think that's yeah, small little shifts. You do think about that because we are trying to keep the kids busy, but at the same time, make sure that that time is best spent really connecting. So, being kind of both of us, I guess, parents of neurodivergent children, like we've had different struggles over time and had counseling and therapy and elements for the kids and such. So like and I think obviously different cases, different bases, but different experiences. But what would you say is kind of the difference between like being patient and maybe like kind of permissive when your kid is feeling anxious and being neurodivergent?
Yeah. So neurodivergence it's a big umbrella. We talk about autism being a big umbrella, right? But really any disability type is. let's take ADHD, for example. The characteristics of what your child is going through in ADHD could be completely different than someone else. So I say that because as a house filled with ADHD, uh, myself being a proud ADHDer and having multiple kids with ADHD, it presents itself differently in all of us, right? There are definitely similar traits that my kids have, that I know I've worked through that they have, but it's still different. As far as like patient being permissive with them, everything is on an individual basis. So when I'm trying, what I constantly tell myself is that I don't have to fix every moment at the moment. Sometimes I got to let my kids have a little bit of time. I'm not shying away from listening to them or helping them through their challenges. More like I'm listening. I'm listening and observing what they're going through so that I can help them. Permissiveness really is kind of like that's a problem and I'm just going to step away because I'm not sure how to deal with it. And again, as I said, that's very common for dads to experience that. And if you're a father listening to that, understand, give yourself some grace. It's legit. It's hard. When your kids struggle with anything, it is one of the worst feelings in the world. But what you have to do is keep getting yourself, dust yourself off and keep getting yourself back up because being patient doesn't mean you're fixing everything all the time. It's not a sign of weakness, by the way. Like sometimes with men, we think like if we're not fixing things immediately, or if I'm going to be patient and let things take its course, sometimes we think that's like a sign of weakness, and I'm not being strong enough. But that's not the case. Sometimes it involves listening, observing, and understanding. You can't always fix all your problems, and for your kids, it's just they're not cars. We don't hook them up to diagnostic machines and say, "Oh yeah, there's the exact problem." They're humans, and the development they go through is challenging, but also amazing. Like I look at my daughter, who's 13, where she was at as someone with ADHD when she was 5 versus where she's at now. She's just a different human altogether. But that growth has taken a lot of work, not just for myself and my wife, but the village we've created to help her get to this point. And what we have found, because of all that support, able to fade some of that back, right? And that's the beauty of it. She becomes more and more independent. She starts to learn more about herself and how her brain works and operates, and she starts to advocate more for herself. And she needs to depend on people less, and that's the beauty of it. But it's patience that you need to have to be able to get them to work through that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so let's talk about a specific situation that maybe not everybody has the patience for is like a meltdown, right?
Mhm.
Like, what's the first thing a dad must like just stop doing immediately, you know, even if it is correct in this case?
Yeah. So it's kind of dependent on the situation. If your 3-year-old's having a meltdown, you can't just like leave the room, right? It's like you gotta make sure they're safe. If your 13-year-old is having a meltdown, or your 17-year-old's having a moment, giving them time is might be the correct scenario. Walking away. Now, this is I tell you, I have had to learn this. Like you learn things the hard way as a father. There's, at least in my book of fatherhood, like how to be a dad. Somebody ripped out tons of chapters I and I wish I would have been able to read. One of the things, though, is there's a time when you walk away and let them have a minute. When they're real young, you obviously have to be there in the system through it. But here's what happens when we talk about like a meltdown or just you're unregulated. Your brain goes to like a high level of intensity red. Because of that, you're not thinking straight. Things come out raw if they're verbally communicating it. Things may be shared that, and this can also be from the parent end too. Like if you can't step aside, maybe you can at least do it emotionally, so you keep yourself as calm in the moment as possible. So that's really hard. You've got young kids because they have really a really hard time of managing regulating their emotions because they're young and it's understandable. Think about all the adults who have a hard time with it. And so it's hard to be able to get them through that process in the moment, but sometimes you got to remind yourself it is a moment. Like we're going to get through this. And the most important thing right now is make sure that they're safe, you're safe, everybody's safe. And then you want to address it. Like if it's something like it's a challenging behavior or something you feel like you got to address, that's not the moment to do it. When they're in a better spot emotionally, that's the better time to address it.
Yeah, patience being the key there for sure. And I mean, my wife kind of says like reading the room, right? Like
Yeah.
understand the situation and don't just try to barge in and create a
Yep.
solution. You know, sometimes it's maybe just laying next to your kid until they kind of get past it. Or one thing I really enjoy doing that's worked well is like I've actually been a DJ for 27 years. So music is it runs deep in this family, I would say. So
Yeah.
having a song or a set of songs that really feeds to that moment is so powerful. And I've
That is
noticed
awesome.
those tantrums really like the time to recover, if you will, has really decreased when they're like, oh, okay, this is my calm song.
I'm glad you said this. And a lot of people don't realize this, but there's so much brain research that goes back to certain things involving the senses can help kids, adults too. Um, Music is definitely one of them. Like in my classes, when I'm trying to teach, future educators how to be good teachers, I've constantly got music and I'm using it for certain reasons. I want them to collaborate and talk. I'm going to put some like vibrant music on. I want them to calm because we're going to maybe they're going to do something. I'm going to put something low key on. So you can do those things, but it also relates well to your kids too. Music can help to set mood. The other thing that's really powerful using your senses is like some kind of scent. There's something calming about certain fragrances that help kids. And so what think for example, like I don't know, a house that you think smells nice. You walk into it and you're like, "Oh, that's nice." All the like it does something to your brain where it's kind of like helps you regulate a little bit, put you in a positive state. So that's definitely, yeah, music is definitely when using anything involving your senses can be helpful.
Amazing. Yeah. So let's kind of move on to like kind of the marriage element, because I do think this is obviously a crucial conversation in being kind of a father. I know like with the father figure element of us, some people are kind of thrust into different relationships and situations. So we're trying to be father figures in whatever kind of case that is, right? And I do feel like a lot of it is due to the, relationships and situations in the partners, right? So specifically for you and like really high need seasons, like what kind of marriage pattern do you feel like shows up first? Because I know that sometimes there's like the blame game or there's like kind of scorekeeping or people shutting down. So like what kind of pattern do you feel like shows up between you and your wife?
Yeah, so like our kids have grown through the years, so is our relationship, and how we work together. We literally there's so much need within our kids that we have to band together. It is we are stronger if we work together. Uh, so this hasn't been an enormous challenge for us, but I will say that um, and it hasn't been as much about like the blame game, other than I've found in myself certain moments when I would start to back away from certain things. And I've got a very strong-willed wife, which I appreciate. I swear, she has like an invisible cape for everything that she does for our whole family. And there have been moments where she, early on, when some of the challenges would arise with our kids, and we're going way back to when our son was real young, uh, she would kind of let me know, yeah, we need you here. We got to work on this. Communication can't be understated. Like you and your spouse working together to help your kids through the challenges, whatever they face. If you are lucky enough to have a significant other, that is, it is a great privilege that you can work on that together. The hard part is, and I see this as somebody who has worked with a lot of families through the years who have kids with significant challenges. There's a lot of blame within the relationship. and some of that is stems from their internal struggles you have. Like I said, there isn't a whole lot that's harder than when you see your kid struggling. I've been in far too many meetings, ran far too many meetings where we had to share with parents, hey, your child's been diagnosed with fill in the blank, autism, ADHD, learning disability, whatever it is. And, had to give them tissues is really stinking hard to go through. And eventually seeing them go through that over time, you find that sometimes those marriages don't last. And I say sometimes, I'll be honest with you, like the divorce rate is super high when you've got kids who have medical needs or disabilities in general. And it's because exactly what you're talking about. You fall into that category of blaming, scorekeeping, or just backing away completely. Um, those things are easier to do than banding together to work collaboratively as a team. And so, is it hard? Yeah, it's absolutely hard. But if it's in the best interest of your kid to find a way for the both of you to try to figure out solutions together.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, if you could give maybe couples like one rule for like crisis parenting, what is it?
Huh. Uh, finding finding time, and as hard as parents, you don't have a lot of time. Finding time that you get to work through solutions together. It might be for my wife and I, it's usually the end of the night. Kids are off, whether they're in bed or they're going to their rooms. That is our window where we can, yes, we don't want everything in our life to be serious, but if we're going to help our kids, that's our window to kind of go through it. Um, Fixing everything in the moments doesn't always happen seamlessly. It's just uh, not always the case. So whatever you can do, as I said, to communicate effectively, but find some time together if you can daily, um, to be able to um, bounce ideas off each other. Like sometimes helping kids through struggling is just trying to throw spaghetti at a wall and to figure out solutions. And it's a lot more effective if you've got multiple people who do it.
Yeah, and I guess from a communication, obviously being the backbone of every relationship, like, is there maybe like a suggested sentence you would wish every couple would kind of say to each other weekly in
Hmm.
these, survival sessions, you can call them?
Oh, that's a good question, man. I don't know if it would be like one sentence other than I'll tell you this from a dad's perspective. It's less about when you have, at least what I would say. I'm not a marriage counselor or anything in that of that nature. What you do to listen to your wife sometimes is a whole lot more important than what you do to talk with your wife. There's a two-way street to your communication, and being willing to listen is a big part that a lot it's a male thing. Like it's we always struggle with listening, like intently listening, not like making it look like I'm listening, like actually hearing what she's saying, what your spouse is saying, and working together, I would say is probably a key piece for a lot of dads.
I always tell my kids, you need to listen to me with your eyes at the same time, right? Because otherwise they're like,
That's true.
right? So,
True.
I had a parent teacher conference recently with one of my kids' teachers, and I went into the meeting and did the meeting and whatnot, and it was great. And then after the teacher came right to me and was like, "Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We don't get too many dads around here," which I thought was
Yeah.
like, really interesting, kind of eye-opening, right? So I mean, like most dads, I guess, would either just vanish from school issues or I don't know, come in swinging. Like, what is the calm kind of lethal advocacy like look like? How do you present yourself here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked this because a lot of dads have a lot of trauma, their own trauma that goes back to their school days. I got plenty. I'm a teacher, obviously at a higher ed level now, but my schooling was bumpy at best. I drove some of my teachers nuts, and I had a lot of academic challenges, which is part of why I had some of my behavior challenges. But it's also why I went into education because I wanted to help kids who had challenges. But what I have found is a lot of dads have a hard time getting back into school because of what the challenges that they had, right? Whether it be, conjures up, ideas of things they went through, or it makes them feel uncomfortable stepping into a situation where it's real. Like it's real, like this person is going to tell me information about where my child is at with their reading, with their math, with their writing. And probably a little easier if you know your child, if those things come easy to your child, but for a lot of kids, that's not the case. Um, so as far as like if you feel like you're going into school as somebody who's trying to open a lot of what I'll talk about with parents and schools is that you got to have the ability to communicate together. But a lot of that goes back to the connection you make. What I share with educators, they used to, my old job was I'd be in charge of like new teacher in service. And I would tell them, like, one of the most important things you can do from the jump is build connections with your students. But the other piece of that is building connections with their family because your students are going to benefit if the parents are comfortable enough to come in and work with you. And then if you got to have tough conversations with parents, they know that you're coming to them from a place of care and compassion as opposed to let me tell you the 900 things that Johnny did wrong today. So it's a big difference. So back to your question, I have the same kind of approach from parents. Like, what can you do to connect with the teacher so that you feel like you're comfortable stepping in? And whether that be comfortable, like going in to just listen, or even going in to respectfully communicate some challenges that you want addressed as a parent.
Now, are there kind of any misreads involved in that, like between the schools and the parents, or the parents and the schools? Like, do you find any consistencies there?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Uh, Sometimes it's just a lack of understanding from both ends. Sometimes the teachers aren't fully understanding what the parents are saying. And sometimes it works the other way. Like the parents don't understand what the teachers are saying. And sometimes it just be like your viewpoints don't seem to mesh. So that is definitely a huge challenge. It, as a professor, my students actually tell me one of their biggest scares about going into teaching, I always figured it was going to be like working with behaviors. And that is definitely like working through challenging behaviors is definitely a part of it. But their number one scare is actually having to talk to parents and like call parents and communicate with parents. And the reason is they don't know what they're going to get. Like if this message I share with a parent, is it going to be received okay? And we'll be able to work through it together. So um, unfortunately, sometimes when you're having lines of communication, it doesn't always come off clean. And so the best way to benefit your child is when we have both sides working together collaboratively and being respectful, even when you disagree on stuff, being respectful and trying to work through it together. Almost like we talked about your relationship with your spouse, kind of a similar approach, really. You want to work to collaboratively together, even if you don't see exactly eye to eye. Like, is there uh, some kind of middle ground we can meet at where we can help the kid?
Hmm, that makes a lot of sense. I think like there's a big word that a lot of people, this trait, a lot of people are lacking these days, and I find that accountability word with a capital A is something that has come to the forefront in so many kind of conversations that I've had, and I feel like people need to first take on that personal accountability, and then you can kind of teach that to kids. Like I'm trying to teach that to my kids, right? So, what does accountability mean to you, sir?
Hmm. It's a good question. Uh, in just plain terms, it means taking care of your responsibilities. So, as a father, from like a parent standpoint, that means taking care of your work and doing whatever is best for your kids and your family. From a kid's standpoint, we want our kids to be accountable too. But you also got to remember human development is takes time. Your kid is not going to want to hold themselves accountable from the jump. This is a slow cook over time, right? So in other words, if you're looking for your 5-year-old to stand up and say, yes, I really made that mistake. That was horrific. I deserve to be grounded for a week now. If that's the message you're looking for, you might be waiting a while before you get that, um, because your role, the younger they are, the more guidance they need in those areas, and you got to be willing to help them. And they're gonna push back. You push back on whether it be they don't want to take accountability for something they lied about or something they did, or you know you caught them doing something. Those things are all natural. It's like commonplace. And it continues all the way up. But what you find is as they get older, they maybe in the moment, they might not always take accountability, but they're more likely as they get older to be able to, if you're working with them over time, I should say, to maybe come back and circle back and be like, yeah, I made a mistake there. As far as like fathers, um, I think one of the biggest pieces of accountability is owning up for the things that you haven't done well and giving yourself grace. Don't blame yourself, you know, and let it completely wreck your relationship with your kids because you still feel like you're ruining things for your kids. Give yourself grace and just work on self improvement. Everybody's got stuff to improve on. Doesn't matter who you are. You could be the most amazing person in the world, but you still got areas to improve on. So, but accountability is a lot of different things. But one thing would be trying to identify an area that you're going to improve on and keep working towards and improving.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that's a pretty uncomfortable action for most. So, like, what's the
Mm.
consequence if they do nothing?
Mm. The consequence is that, especially for fathers, that you're hurting your family, you're hurting your relationships with your kids. So that's why I say give yourself grace and do what you need to do to get yourself back on the horse, so to speak. I've seen way too many kids feel the effects of not having parental support, and far more kids than most probably want to even realize. And the effects of that, it's not rocket science. Think about what life would be like if you didn't have your father or your mother in your life. And from our standpoint as dads, what would life be like if my father didn't take accountability and try to get better? I've seen, I, I've had some instances where I had fathers get arrested, right? And I've seen, and I've been the shoulder to cry on for some kids as they had to try to work through that junk themselves, knowing that they're not going to see their dad for X number of years. And then the other side of that is after imprisonment, sometimes they don't come back at all because they feel ashamed. They feel like they don't want to, they feel like they're going to wreck their kid's life even more if they come back into the fold. So accountability comes in a lot of different ways. That's obviously like the ultimate example of it. But the important thing is remember everybody makes mistakes. It's what you do in the next play that's going to make the most importance, what you do moving forward. So just keep reminding yourself, all right, I made that mistake. Be honest with yourself. What am I going to do to get better? Because, my kid deserves better.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of a term that we've coined with the father figure form they called the father mark. And it's basically like, that imprint that you leave on your kids. And, as kids ourselves previously, we had a father mark that was essentially left on us, whether the father was not there and it was maybe
Yeah.
negative, or the father was there wholeheartedly and positive, right? So
Yep.
I would say, what is maybe the most important father mark that you would suggest leaving on a child?
They need no, there's a variety. They need to know, they need to see a role model in their lives. Like society in general, we don't have enough positive male role models. You can't have enough. But beyond that, they need to see somebody who's willing to support them. This is something that males in general we struggle with. As you said, going back to what somebody who posts some comments about making your kids be turn out to be snowflakes if if you're supportive. that's not the case. Kids need you to be, maybe not fix all their problems, but they need you to be, for lack of better terminology, all in. You need to be there for them. If you're not fixing their problems, you're trying to say, let's work on this together and see what we can do to make things better. So, not an easy answer by any stretch of the imagination, but important.
My last question was going to be define dad's all in one sentence. Did you just give that answer?
I kind of gave some of it, huh? Yeah, I always say like, um, obviously my podcast is Dad's All In Podcast. So I have like, my mantra is really, what are the main things that fathers need to do? Number one, you need to be a role model. Number two, you need to be supportive. You need to be active. You need to be present. Active meaning you're there, you're actually there, but even though you're there doesn't always mean you're present. That makes sense, right? Like how many dads struggle with like, I'm here with my kid, but I'm scrolling on my phone. So like those kind of four areas, if you're working towards those areas, I would say you're definitely all in.
Amazing. Well, usually I like to have like one kind of takeaway in any conversation I have, Kyle, but I can tell you there was probably dozens of takeaways from this conversation. So I really appreciate you and your time for being here. I know it's very valuable. Let's take a minute or so here to do a quick plug for yourself. Tell us where we can find Dad's All In and specifically the work you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thanks again for the conversation. I appreciate it. Yeah, so you can find my YouTube channel. It's the Dad's All In Parent Hub. And I'm not solely focused on just helping fathers. I'm solely focused on helping parents. The majority of my audience is dads, though. And what I'm doing in 2026 on YouTube channel is pretty much whatever my audience wants. So I am committed to finding answers. And so that's meant I've had questions come in by email or in comments or in DMs on social media. My social media handle for all the socials is Dad's Only Hub on most of them as well. But I'll have questions about like, hey, what can you share with me about how to organize my life? So do some research on that. I've had questions if this has actually sparked a lot in the last 2 months. Some fathers reach out with financial challenges. And so I've done digging into things that I didn't know a whole lot about. Not that I didn't, obviously as a parent, try to learn about like life on a budget. But I mean, you're talking about in one case, the guy was like, I lost my job. I need some extra help. Any ideas? And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole of like, what are some financial assistance programs? I created like a free booklet for my audience in case they need it. For the cost of everything's been going up, and what do you do in the end? Even middle class families are struggling financially because of a variety of things. So I say all of that because on my YouTube channel, and also it's filtered into my podcast, Dad's Only Podcast. I'm focused on whatever the audience wants. So, and I honestly believe that whatever I can share is what my focus is going to be. So you can find my podcast. I also do a Sunday night live show every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, and that focuses pretty much around the same kinds of things.
Amazing. Appreciate you, Kyle. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you. And I appreciate the extensive questions. And as I told you before we recorded, I've been in a lot of interviews through the years. Even before I did family podcasting, I was in education podcasting for a long time. And I don't think I've ever had as extensive like level of questions that I really had to think hard about as the ones you did. And I mean that in a positive way. So thank
Yeah.
you.
I'm glad I'm trying to make you think here.